Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the ONCIMMUNE Holdings PLC full-year trading update investor presentation. We do apologise for the slight delay in the start this afternoon. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and could be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type your question in and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Dr. Adam Hill, CEO, and Matthew Hall, CFO of ONCIMMUNE Holdings PLC. Good afternoon.
Paul, and welcome everyone this afternoon. I'm joined here by Matthew Hall, our CFO. My name is Adam Hill, Chief Executive of ONCIMMUNE. We're going to be presenting today the full year trading update that was announced this morning via RNS. I hope you'll all agree that that was a transparent, very obvious RNS, and as a result, we are going to simply summarise the top line results during this presentation. But please, if there are any questions, do use the Q&A tab. The Immuno Insights business is very much the thrust behind both FY21's numbers and indeed what we anticipate to be FY22's numbers. The proposition to the market is well summarised here by one of our major champions at Roche, and indeed one of our customers, who has clearly identified, as have many others, that the Immuno Insights service proposition allows pharmaceutical companies to pick patients that are most likely to respond positively and identify patients that are going to go on to get immune-related adverse events. As these assets become ever more complex and expensive, that is going to become, as it is today already, a very valuable offering. Over the last year, there's been much progress on the Immuno Insights side of our business. Clearly, we have signed a number of contracts with very large pharmaceutical companies down to small biotechs, but maybe some of the more recent examples have been with the infectious disease panel, which was the development of which was funded by the British government in September last year. Both Cedars-Sinai, a very large healthcare system on the west coast of the US, and Roche are now using that panel with us to better understand long COVID and understand the response of patients to repurposed therapeutic assets as we start to unpick the pandemic and individuals' response to the disease. But beyond Immuno Insights, there has also been a tremendous amount of progress despite the COVID pandemic backdrop on our early CDT product business. We were able to announce an adoption by a CCG in the east of England, Norfolk and Waveney, who have gone on to do nearly 1,000 tests to date, with over a quarter of patients receiving a positive result and being followed up through the appropriate diagnostic paradigm for a potential lung cancer. So lots of progress. Outside of those events that we have been able to announce that drive revenue, of course, we have also been research active and publishing, as you would expect. And maybe one of the more important publications that we've been able to push into the market most recently is in partnership with Jessica Hassel at Heidelberg University on melanoma, which was presented at ASCO earlier on in last financial year. Just to remind you, it is a common platform that services both our product and our service business, that starts with a very large immunogenic protein library, a bank of proteins that we interrogate using Serotag, our high throughput screening tool, and then use Serotag to develop Navigate panels. These are research panels, not clinical diagnostics, which can be used by academics. They can be used by research scientists in pharma, and biotech in order to understand binding events between antibodies and antigens. And from those binding events and the use of our response models, our bioinformatics models, or our data science models, if you like, we come up with a panel of immunogenic proteins that might be used to better select patients for a positive result and identify patients that are going to go on to get immune-related adverse events. So quickly on to the highlights. On the Immuno Insights side of the business, we have continued to strengthen relationships with Roche and Genentech. The Roche group as a whole forms a substantial customer in FY21 and will continue to do so into FY2022. There has been more autoantibody profiling contracts signed in the last quarter, principally with a US-based global pharmaceutical company. Strengthening of that relationship is anticipated into FY22 as they have a substantial portfolio of immune modulating assets that we can start to work with. But this first engagement is very much a foot in the door to demonstrate and deliver value to those researchers. The launch of our infectious diseases panel, the full fat version of which will be completed validation by the back end of this summer, has led to contracts with both Roche, who are now running that with us on the Covacta study, samples from the Covacta study, with the option to extend into the Remdacta and Mariposa studies of repurposed assets from Roche and Gilead, as well as Cedars-Sinai, who have now signed their fourth contract with ONCIMMUNE to explore long COVID and the repurposing of therapeutic assets in their patient population. On the early CDT side of the business, there have been a number of contracts throughout the year, principally the Norfolk and Waveney contract I've spoken about earlier. Nearly 1,000 early CDT lung blood tests have been performed, and over a quarter of those positive, triaging to the next diagnostic step in the appropriate pathway. But equally, the IDX lung program is now recruiting patients in both Southampton and Leeds. In the fourth quarter, we were lucky enough to sign another NHS contract, albeit have not presented the detail of that, as that program is to be launched in the first quarter of this financial year, and so more information will be forthcoming shortly. And then finally, our US partner Biodesix in the US for early CDT lung has seen a remarkable recovery in demand for Notify CDT, their name for early CDT lung, and so we hope that continues throughout the year. So there's plenty to be cautiously optimistic about around the early CDT product portfolio. Matthew, maybe over to you. We can't hear you, Matthew.
Matthew, we can't actually hear you at the moment. There we go. You're coming through the telephone, Matthew. I think that may be on. If you could speak now, Matthew, is your telephone off mute? Unfortunately, we're not picking you up, Matthew. We're going to have to get you to dial in 1 second, please. They're very faint on that there, Matthew, unfortunately. Adam, perhaps may I just ask you just to run through these while we get Matthew back in?
Yeah, absolutely. So FY21 revenues were 5.6 million. That's an 8x increase on top line over FY20. In addition to driving top line, of course, as you've heard before, we've been implementing an aggressive cost management and cost reduction program throughout FY20 to bring numbers in at what is market consensus. We anticipate a strong start to FY22, principally because a number of contracts that might have been signed in Q4 FY21 have slipped by a couple of weeks into FY22, and so we anticipate that a number of substantial contracts, if landed in Q1 FY22, will contribute to about 50% of FY22's market expectations for Immuno Insights. In the year, of course, you will remember that we undertook a successful equity placing a couple of months ago, and that has enabled a 4x scale up in our Immuno Insights operating capacity in Dortmund. The CapEx has been ordered, it has arrived, it is being configured and implemented into our site in Dortmund. The laboratory team are being hired, and of the 14 heads we are putting into that business, there are only 3 remaining to be brought into the team. And of course, we are actively recruiting for our BD team in North America. So delivering against plan to upscale the capacity of our Immuno Insights business. The Immuno Insights business continues to benefit from an attractive pipeline, over 160 opportunities with 80 plus pharmaceutical companies and biotechs, and it has led us to start to consider whether we will need a duplicate Immuno Insights facility in the US in order to service future demand. But as yet, no plans have been made, and we are simply running the numbers to understand both the costs and timing that would be required in order to implement that facility and deliver against the bow wave of demand that we are seeing for this service. Finally, and to summarize, there is a number of opportunities in the pipeline that we hope will land fairly soon in Q1 and enable us to start FY22 strong. The pipeline equally is going to grow upon the successful validation of our Immuno Insights infectious disease panel, which will allow us to access more than the 160 or plus opportunities that currently sit in our pipeline. And equally, whilst I do urge cautious optimism, there is reason to be optimistic about the growth of early CDT lung, both in the UK and the US. With that, Paul, I'll hand back to you.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Adam. Thank you for updating investors there. Just while the investors just take a moment just to submit some more questions, I would like to remind them that a copy of the presentation along with the Q&A will be available on the Investor Meet Company platform post this presentation. I'd also like to remind investors that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after the presentation has ended, you will be redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. Adam, perhaps I could just direct you to the Q&A tab. We've had a couple of questions come through from investors, and if you could just read those out where appropriate to do so, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have a question about what revenue growth do we expect the fundraise to support moving forward. As we announced at the time, the fundraise is to quadruple capacity in our Dortmund facility, and whilst CapEx and people are being brought into the facility, it will take a little bit of time for that capacity to come online. We expect to be at about 20 to 25,000 samples in capacity by the back end of this calendar year. And then by the end of this financial year, as we tip into the next financial year, we expect to be at 40,000 samples a year. Our utilization of that capacity is approximately is approximately 60%. And so therefore you can understand at €1,000 a sample, a little over €1,000 a sample, this increase in capacity certainly will have an impact in the medium term on top line. A question about a previous RNS in which we mentioned that we were investigating a US listing. That remains front of mind and a topic of conversation amongst the board. We announced our interest in the US capital markets at the point at which we announced the successful fundraise in March. And we have made substantial progress. We have been engaging with investors up and down the East Coast. Of course, that's far easier today than maybe it once was, as all of those conversations are via Zoom rather than requiring us to be on a plane. And we have been exploring options with regards to advisors. I can't guide you on timeline as yet, or indeed give you concrete next steps, but a substantial amount of time and effort is being put into exploring the best way to access the specialist and sophisticated life science investment market in the US. Another question here: what's happened to early CDT in partnerships in other countries? Well, those other countries, and principally we talk about Europe, LATAM, and Southeast Asia, are struggling with COVID and variably recovering from COVID. And as a result, we are seeing a variable uptake in our product through our distributors. But I would urge you to focus principally on the UK, the US, and indeed when we appoint a new partner for China, as we hope to in the not too distant future, China as a strategic market. Another question is about the Scottish trial and whether it was any good or not. And indeed, the Scottish trial is the largest randomized study of a blood-based biomarker for early detection. This is the ECLS trial. It was 7 or 8 years in the making, and therefore there is a cash time distance to achieve that level of evidence that no one else has been able to achieve to date. It is absolutely the driver of adoption by the NHS. We are the only blood-based diagnostic for lung cancer detection being adopted by the NHS today and for the foreseeable future. And so it has had a tremendous impact. We will be moving to another evaluation of early CDT lung in Scotland on commercial rates for the company that will be substantially larger than the ECLS trial. And I hope in the first quarter I will be able to present more information on that. Another question here is: has the company considered splitting the Immuno Insights and early CDT businesses into two separate entities? They remain as two subsidiaries. Our early CDT early CDT business actually is run out of Nottingham in the UK, and our Immuno Insights business is run out of our Dortmund facility in Germany. We have been discussing options for both businesses moving forward, and of course we will always act in shareholders' best interests. But at this point in time, there is nothing to report to the market. So another question, can you let us know a little more about what you're doing with long COVID and the Lighthouse labs? Well, of course, the Medicines Discovery Catapult was responsible for the initial establishment of the Lighthouse labs. Chris Malloy there did an incredibly good job of initiating those programs in the very earliest days last year of the pandemic. And come September, we had found a way of working with the Medicines Discovery Catapult to better understand what we now know as long COVID, which is autoimmune mediated, a specialty of ONCIMMUNE, for two reasons. Firstly, to understand both the short-term and long-term effects upon patients that unfortunately develop COVID, but also trying to understand the impact and the effectiveness of drugs that are being repurposed or developed for the treatment of the disease. I think we're very much in the foothills of that, but as I described, Cedars-Sinai and Roche already are very pleased paying customers of the service that has been developed as a resultant of that government investment and the partnership we have with the Medicines Discovery Catapult and the Lighthouse infrastructure. There's another question about, would we consider an acquisition as an option to expand our US footprint? And absolutely, both organic and inorganic growth is on the table. We, as you know, bought Protein Diagnostics in March 2019. That very much has been the catalyst for our Immuno Insights business. We divested our US subsidiary to Biodesics, and so we are not afraid of inorganic growth or catalysts to this company. And should there be an appropriate opportunity, of course, we would explore it. I'm also being asked, where do we see Immuno Insights in 5 years' time? And that's a difficult one. It's a difficult one, and a question that I was quite rightly asked when we did the fundraise, because what we know is that there is demand in our pipeline for the capacity that we are implementing. We are moving from 10,000 samples a year to 40,000 samples a year in fairly short order. The reality is that if we land contracts in Q1, as we anticipate, we probably need more capacity than 40,000. Hence, my comment about a potential facility in the US in the medium term. But what we don't know, and I don't think anyone has got a good grasp of, what the overall size of the market is. You can, of course, size it based on the number of trials of immune modulating drugs in the 3 disease domains that we care about, and the average number of samples in each trial, and you know, whether we might be able to get 1% or 5% of that market in 3 years. But I think the honest truth is that we simply don't know, but we know there is demand. We know that there is continual demand. We know that our customers carry on coming back to us with bigger projects than before, and we need to continue to service that in the best way that we possibly can. Maybe the final question is, how would the US expansion be funded? And again, a great question. And I think it will not be funded in the same way that we funded the German expansion by coming out and doing a fundraise. I think we have every ambition over the next 6, 12, 18 months to be driving profitable revenue through this business. And so it is perfectly reasonable to expect us to be funding that off our own balance sheet in the not too distant future.
Adam, thank you very much indeed. You have answered every single question that we've had come through from investors. And of course, if any further questions do come through, you will have the ability to review those. Perhaps I could just ask you for a few final words just to wrap up before I redirect investors to give you some feedback.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, we want to be engaging with investors frequently, and we'll hopefully be able to have an opportunity throughout the first quarter to come back and talk about those contracts as and when they land for our Immuno Insights business. But in the meantime, should there be any further questions, then please do reach out and email us. Many thanks for all of your continual support.
Adam, thank you again. Thank you very much for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to end the session, as you'll be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete and will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of ONCIMMUNE Holdings PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session. Thank you and good afternoon.